Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2023 Korbel Honors. Please welcome to the stage Dean of the Korbel School, Fritz Mayer.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. Chancellor Hafner, Provost Clark, members of the Board of Trustees, and of the Social Science Foundation, our advisory board, fellow deans, students, staff, faculty, alumni, and honored guests. Good evening and welcome to the Korbel Honors. It is just a great pleasure to see you all this evening. Thank you so much for being here. Before we start, I ask you to join me in recognizing that we meet on the traditional homeland of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations, acknowledging the painful record of violence and displacement that is our history, and honoring not only the ancestors, but also the enduring presence of Native peoples in Denver and Colorado. So tonight is a moment to remember what brings us together as a community and to remind ourselves of the values in our mission. As you know, we will be paying particular tribute this evening to the life and legacy of Madeleine Korbel Albright, the daughter of our founder, Joseph Korbel, the first woman Secretary of State, and an inspiration to so many. We are thrilled that joining her this evening to celebrate her life will be the other two women Secretaries of State, Secretary Condoleezza Rice by video, and with us in person this evening, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Wonderful. We had expected also to be joined this evening by Madeleine Albright's brother, John Korbel, a longtime member of our board, the Social Science Foundation, and a dear friend to many of us here tonight and to the school that bears his family name. Very sadly, John passed away a few weeks ago on the eve of our board meeting. So we'd long planned this evening as a tribute to Madeleine. We will now also honor John's legacy and dedicate this evening to his memory. And I am so glad that John's wife Pam, his sons Joseph and Peter, wife Katrina here this evening to be with us for this occasion. On Saturday, I had the honor of attending and speaking briefly at John's celebration of life ceremony at the Czech Embassy in Washington. It was a deeply moving service with extraordinary testimonials from many people who shared memories of John. Joe and Peter, no father could hope for more moving or loving tributes from their sons. It was really lovely. John was a kind and wise and thoughtful man, a man of great humanity and generosity. Although born in Belgrade, he grew up in Denver, very much an American kid. Yet he was also deeply aware of his family's story, and that story gave him at once a tremendous optimism about this country and its possibilities, along with an awareness of how precious and fragile the American experience is, the same qualities I think his older sister had. It was an invaluable perspective for us at the Korbel School. And on a personal note, as I shared John's celebration of life, I felt a deep connection to John because of the remarkable parallels of our family histories. Both of us sons of refugees from Europe who had survived the catastrophes of World War II and its aftermath. Both of us lost many relatives in the Holocaust. In my case, my grandfather, for whom I am named. Both of our families made a new life in America, and like so many immigrants, believed fervently in its promise. The Korbel School meant a great deal to John. He was devoted to doing all he could to support it. At our board meetings, he was always constructive, always engaged, always humble. He never invoked his family name in our meetings, yet his presence was a constant reminder of our history and our commitment to doing all we can to make the world a better place. We learned of John's passing only a few minutes before our board meeting began, and it was indeed a shock. But throughout the day, as we shared stories about him, John was very much with us in spirit. What that meant to all of us in the end was an expression of John's optimistic spirit and a determination that it was up to us to carry forward the legacy of the Korbel family, the legacy of John Korbel. We do that tonight. So I now ask Jim Polsfoot, the chair of the Social Science Foundation Board, to join me in presenting a gift to John's family, honoring and commemorating his service to the SSF Board, the Korbel School, and the University of Denver. And ask Pam, and Joe, Peter, Christina to come join us on stage as well. Well, it's been a great year at the Korbel School. As we've come out of COVID, the school's come back alive with classrooms full, students hanging out in the new Charrington Commons, events big and small, and now tonight. It's a vibrant place. Every day I get to hear stories about what our students are doing in and out of the classroom, about the scholarship of our faculty, the support for our students from our staff in career services and student affairs, about the achievements of our alumni, and about the impact we are collectively having in the world. Before we honor two of our own with the Korbel Teaching and the Distinguished Alumni Awards, I invite you now to watch a short video that I think begins to capture some of that vibrancy that we celebrate this evening.
The Korbel School is where you want to come if you want to make an impact.
The Korbel School is full of opportunities.
A vibrant academic community in one of the most beautiful places in the world.
The Korbel School of International Studies is comprehensive.
Dynamic, happening.
Smart people thinking about the world's most pressing challenges, genuinely trying to find solutions. And that's who we are. That's Korbel.
The mission of the Korbel School is ambitious. We're here to make a difference in the world. We pride ourselves on working on the great issues: climate change, economic inequality, democracy.
We have people coming at these huge issues with a variety of different tools, backgrounds, lenses, experiences. It makes for this incredibly engaging academic environment.
A lot of our courses are very discussion-based. Then we also learn how to just communicate with people that may have different viewpoints within our community.
What's happening in a local area is likely happening somewhere else in some other local area on the other side of the globe. And we want to be bringing folks together to connect those ideas.
I think a big highlight for me from my time at Korbel too was the ability to go to a bunch of different presentations and workshops with speakers that were coming in around the world.
Korbel offered me experience not only in academic endeavor but also in practice. I work with members of Congress today, and I do a lot of foreign policy work, and this knowledge comes from Korbel.
I spent time in Ecuador while I was at Korbel. I spent a summer in Lusaka in Zambia working for an organization there. So I think there's just a real opportunity to test out a bunch of different things and then building connections with organizations that are already here that are looking for talented people.
There's a lot of issues I feel like that Colorado faces right now, whether it's affordable housing, homelessness, food insecurity. My goal here is really just to learn as much as I can and take it back to my community.
There is so much happening in the world today, and some days it can be a little daunting, but it's also an important moment for a school like the Korbel School to step up, to be the place that is part of the solution.
Denver's a great place to be. This is where you can get engaged in local government, in state government, and in federal government. Colorado in general has one of the highest rates in the country for nonprofit organizations.
I perceive my professors as my mentors, and every one of them that I've interacted with have given me invaluable advice about my field.
They're always just checking in on us and asking us how we're doing on our internship searches and our career searches. It really helps us feel like we're in a tight community that really cares about our success and where we're placed after graduation.
I stay in pretty close touch with a lot of professors here, so if I am confused about something, I can just pick up the phone and be like, hey, do you have any resources on this?
It is a genuine network of people who want the best for each other. So there really is this remarkable community of Korbel graduates and Korbel affiliates.
Absolutely, I watch Korbel students crush it everywhere in Colorado and around the world.
I think we will change the world with our mind, words, and hands. The Korbel School has prepared us to use all three of those, and from now on, it's up to us what we do with that.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nazneen Barma, and I'm an associate professor here at the Korbel School. As you've just witnessed, our students are the beating heart of what we do, and teaching is at the center of the Korbel School's mission. It's my great honor this evening to present this year's Korbel Outstanding Teacher Award to my dear colleague, Professor Singumbe Muyeba. Professor Muyeba exemplifies the extraordinary commitment of Korbel's faculty to our students, both inside and outside the classroom. Singumbe's students made a resounding case for him in the many nominations that came in on his behalf. I'll paraphrase from three of them. Singumbe is one of the best professors at Korbel, truly a gem. He is incredibly engaging and able to communicate his vast knowledge to us in a way that makes the topic click. Dr. Muyeba dedicates time outside class to engage one-on-one with us to understand our plans, progress, and future beyond the class. Professor Muyeba's genuine care for the craft has made being his student a true honor and one of the highlights of my academic career. In addition to all that he does in the classroom, Singumbe engages our students in co-curricular activities as well. Along with Professor Abigail Kapandula, he leads an annual practicum trip to sub-Saharan Africa. And Singumbe and Abby also lead a regular faculty-student tennis match, where at least the word is, Singumbe does some schooling of another sort as well. For me, the learning and curiosity that so resonate with Singumbe's students comes through in every interaction with him. He's a thoughtful, dedicated, and generous colleague who enriches our community, and so very clearly our students' lives. Warm congratulations, Professor Muyeba. It's such a pleasure to present to you this year's Korbel Outstanding Teaching Award.
Good evening, everyone. I only have 1 minute. Thank you to all the students who nominated me for this award. I'm privileged to teach among the brightest and most enthusiastic students a professor could ask for. I will profoundly cherish this award. I'm thankful to God Almighty who I ask for wisdom, guidance, and humility before I go out to teach. At Korbel, I'm truly thankful to serve alongside some of the best professors in their fields, any of whom could have been up here at this moment. A special thanks to Naz, who won the award last year, and to Rachel Epstein, Eileen Grable, and Aaron Schneider for mentorship and guidance. Thank you, Dean Fritz Mayer, for your outstanding leadership and vision. Thank you to all staff at Korbel and DU. Special thanks to Debbie Galen and Mayumi Becker-Heimer, who worked tirelessly on the Nairobi course. Thank you, OTL, for giving me the book, What the Best College Teachers Do at the beginning of my career, and for the courses you offer. Thank you, Abby, for challenging me to think and be better in a loving way. And thanks to my son, Christian, who puts up with disruptions and endures all my dry dad jokes. Thanks to my father in Zambia, whose ambitious beliefs in me sometimes come true, like in this moment. My uncle, the late Professor Ambassador Mwela Musamba Chime, believed in me and taught me to be a good teacher by being a great teacher. He was Zambia's ambassador to the UN when Secretary Albright was Secretary of State, both of whom I acknowledge at this moment. Thank you, and God bless you all.
A little change in the program. I'm not Professor Lynn Holland. Unfortunately, Professor Holland is under the weather this evening and cannot join us, so she sends her regrets, as it was she who nominated our alumna for the next award. The Korbel Distinguished Alumni Award celebrates the significant contributions of Korbel School graduates that Korbel School graduates make in the wider world, having been shaped by their programs, faculty, and classmates. This year's recipient has a long and impressive record in higher education, international diplomacy, and the inclusion of women in the making of foreign policy. As a PhD student and teaching assistant, Lynn writes, we already saw signs of greatness in Claudia Fuentes Julio. Her lectures were rich in information and carefully organized. Her knowledge of democratic development in Latin America was impeccable, and she was always ready to spend extra time with her students. In the years since then, Claudia Fuentes has taught politics, international relations, diplomacy, and most recently peace studies at Chapman University in Southern California. While she was at Chapman, I had the chance to hear from her students, Lynn writes, while conducting an external review of the program there. It was no surprise at all to hear that Professor Fuentes was a standout and a clear favorite among her students. Last year, in light of her distinguished academic career and her years of dedication to the cause of disarmament and the inclusion of women in the making of foreign policy, Claudia was selected to become Chile's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva. For her service to higher education, diplomacy, the inclusion of women in foreign policy, and the goal of peace throughout the world, this year's Distinguished Alumni Award goes to Ambassador Claudia Fuentes Julio.
Thank you. I'm honored, really honored to receive the Distinguished Alumni Award. And I would like to thank Dean of the Joseph Korbel School of International Studies, Professor Fritz Meyer, and also Professor Lynn Holland for her wonderful words as well. I'm proud to be here this evening paying tribute to Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who paved the way for women in diplomacy. She has been an inspiration for women around the world, including myself, who were empowered and believed that it's possible to occupy such high positions of power and authority in a male-oriented world of international politics. It is also an honor to receive this award in the presence of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has transformed the way foreign policy is understood and practiced by bringing women from the periphery to the center of foreign policy, making clear the link between the status of women and the attainment of security and peace, and her continuous reminder that women's rights are human rights. As permanent representative of Chile to the UN in Geneva, I dedicate a significant part of my work to the promotion of women's rights. The good news is that today there are more states, including Chile and other Latin American countries, committed to a feminist foreign policy and the promotion of gender equality. I'm thankful to the professors at Korbel for the knowledge and critical understanding of international politics that has been significant for my role as ambassador. I would like to pay a special tribute to Professor and former Dean Tom Farrer, from whom I learned that a principled yet pragmatic human rights foreign policy is possible. During my time in Denver, I also found friendship and actually love. In front of here is another DU alumni, Raslan Ibrahim, who has been the best and most supportive partner. Thank you. And this year, we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is an opportunity to think how far we have gone in fulfilling the promise of human dignity and equality for all, and what needs to be done to respond to new human rights challenges. I am sure that Joseph Korbel School of International Studies will continue to be at the forefront of this debate. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Rachel Epstein. I'm a professor at the Joseph Korbel School, where I also serve as Senior Associate Dean. I want to begin by adding my congratulations to the award winners that we've seen tonight. Congratulations. And I want to emphasize that they really embody the values that we're putting forth here, dedicating their lives to education and also to creating a more just world. The next individual who we're honoring this evening, Secretary Madeleine Korbel Albright, also exemplifies these values. Secretary Albright was a remarkable leader, mentor, educator, author, and champion of democracy and human rights around the globe. And we are very privileged tonight to pay tribute to her and her legacy this evening. Please join me in watching this video.
You know, Madeleine was a beacon for women leaders. She exemplified her true commitment to women's empowerment all over the world. Madeleine Albright actually was a role model for the world, not just for America.
When she had been U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, she had created a convening of all the female ambassadors. I thought that was a kind of cool idea, and I said, well, how many were there? And she said, 7, only 7. And there were 183 countries at the time she was UN ambassador. She said, yeah, she said it was okay. She said we called it the G7, the Girl 7, for the ambassador from the United States to share her experiences in what was and remains a male-dominated world. That was amazing, equalizing.
She taught the world that women can be as powerful as men in foreign affairs. When I go into the Security Council and I'm sitting behind that placard that says United States, I sometimes think, what would she do? How would she respond to that? Because I think she set a standard that we have all tried to emulate in that position.
She was such a powerful force in influencing people. I would say women and men alike, but for the women of Kosovo, I would say she gave us wings. She also made sure that she brings us together no matter the differences that we had between political parties, between ethnicities, into one joint cause of empowering women. There's still a lot that we have to do, but a lot that we have achieved we truly owe to her.
Well, she used to always talk about coming to the United States as a refugee, fleeing a country that was repressive. She always described the ship that they took over to the United States, seeing the Statue of Liberty as you're coming to the United States for the first time. I mean, I can imagine the suspense to know whether or not you've been granted asylum, whether or not this can become your permanent home, or you will have to go back potentially to a country where you were not free. Much of the commitment Madeleine brought to democracy and human rights grew out of that sense of the United States as a refuge. The knowledge of what it felt like to be part of a family that was denied those rights. She never stopped seeing American foreign policy from the outside in, and that's immensely unusual, I think, in Washington or in any positions of power.
The people of Kosovo saw her as the founding mother of our freedom and our independence, the voice that spoke for us when we had no voice. She fought hard to make sure that democracies came together to bring us freedom, to bring us independence, and build the democracy and the independent state that we have today.
I think Madeleine left in her wake a space to talk about human consequences, to talk about individual dignity, to talk about the soul of the nation and the importance of standing with individuals, standing for human rights in the world. There's a way of talking, a way of debating, a way of being in foreign policy circles now that is much more cognizant of human lives, human consequences, and I can't imagine us having gotten to this place if Madeleine Albright hadn't raised her voice.
What I learned from her is about the power of relationships. And she created a group after she left her job as Secretary of State called her Formers. And these were former foreign ministers who had served when she was Secretary of State. And it was a very powerful grouping from across the world. And those relationships kept her engaged, kept her informed about what was happening in different countries. And it wasn't a working relationship, it was a friendship.
Faleminderit për kontributin e jashtëzakonshëm dhe ekzistencial për lirinë tonë, për pavarësinë tonë, për demokracinë tonë dhe për fuqizimin e grave, jo vetëm në politikë, por në çdo segment të jetës në Kosovë.
She was such a powerful presence. She carried so much power and authority in that small frame. The room kind of spread as she walked through the door.
I think she was immensely savvy and pragmatic, so to reduce her to being merely an idealist would do her no justice. But there's no question the combination of her compass and her North Star, which were those ideals, and then the immense savvy and sophistication she brought to advocating and executing those ideals. I mean, that was the power of Madeleine Albright.
Extraordinary indeed. As a continuation of Secretary Albright's legacy, I'm delighted to announce that the Korbel School, in partnership with Wellesley College, has established a new initiative, the Wellesley Korbel Albright Fellows Program. Secretary Albright, as some of you may know, was a graduate of Wellesley College, as is tonight's keynote speaker. And during her lifetime, she established the Albright Institute at Wellesley to support the study of global affairs. Working with the Albright Institute, this new fellowship program will allow Wellesley undergraduate students to continue their education with a one-year master's degree at the Korbel School. The first entering class of Albright Fellows will arrive here at the Joseph Korbel School in the fall of 2024. We are honored to fulfill Secretary Albright's vision of building an educational bridge between Wellesley College and the Joseph Korbel School of International Studies. So another person who is working to build educational bridges is the 19th Chancellor of the University of Denver, Jeremy Haefner. As Chancellor, Dr. Haefner has sought to expand how we approach education to prepare the next generation of leaders to meet the challenges of our time. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Haefner to the stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel. And again, congratulations to our marvelous award winners. It's a delight to share in your honor, and I know all of us are so proud of what you have accomplished here. I'm so grateful also for all the students. You could hear them when our teaching award was announced as well. So well done, students, well done. We are incredibly proud of the Korbel School of International Studies, its students, its faculty, its alumni, and tonight is a cause for celebration in so many different ways. They exemplify the core of what the University of Denver stands for, a deep commitment to serve the public good. Now, a wise man said to me a long time ago, when there are interesting people with interesting ideas, and you're not one of them, get the heck out of the way. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm thrilled to introduce friend and alumna of the University of Denver, Bronco's co-owner, director of the Hoover Institute, and the 66th U.S. Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice. Please enjoy the video.
Good evening. It is an honor to welcome you all to this very special Korbel Honors event, and an even greater honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Secretary Hillary Clinton. Secretary Clinton served as the 67th United States Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, as a United States Senator representing the state of New York from 2001 to 2009, and as the First Lady of the United States from 1993 to 2001. She is the first woman elected statewide in New York. In 2016, she became the first woman to top a presidential ticket for a major party in the United States. And although Secretary Clinton, my friend Hillary, and I have served in different administrations, belong to different parties, and live on opposite sides of the country, we were both blessed to follow in the footsteps of our nation's first female Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. Although Madeleine did not attend the University of Denver herself, she was nonetheless a great daughter of DU, as her father, Joseph Korbel, was a longtime DU professor and the founder of our Graduate School of International Studies, for which he's now the namesake. I first heard about Madeleine from Dr. Korbel. He told me that he had this daughter who was studying at Columbia with Zbig Brzezinski and that he hoped we would meet someday. Well, meet we did. And I have to tell you that it was in a very funny way. Madeleine was working for the campaign of Michael Dukakis. And she called me and she said that Governor Dukakis needed someone to help him with foreign policy, and would I be interested in serving on that committee? I paused. There was frankly a long pause. And I said, Madeleine, I'm a Republican. She kind of shrieked, how could that be? We had the same father. Well, indeed, we did have the same intellectual father, Joseph Korbel. And I am so grateful that Madeleine and I were able to become friends and colleagues and do so much together. And like many of you in this room, I miss her very, very much. And so I'm just thrilled that this year's Korbel Honors event is held in tribute to Secretary Madeleine Albright, a fearless fighter for freedom on behalf of all people and a trailblazer to women everywhere. I wish I could be there in person, but I invite you to join me in welcoming my friends, Fritz Mayer and Hillary Clinton, to the stage for a keynote conversation.
Well, thank you, Condi. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here this evening. It is a great privilege and an honor to have you with us this evening. Let's start with your relationship with Madeleine. Your paths crossed many times over many years. Tell us about your relationship. Tell us about what she meant to you.
Well, Dean, thank you so much. And to you and the Chancellor and Provost and everyone gathered, it is such a delight to be here at the university on behalf of this special occasion that is remembering and honoring Madeleine Albright. As you heard from Condi Rice, both she and I had the great advantage of following Madeleine because we could see what she did when she broke that glass ceiling, becoming our first woman Secretary of State. But my friendship with Madeleine goes back many years before that. I started hearing about Madeleine Albright in political campaigns, like the one that she was working on in 1988 that she called Condi about, which I think was a surprise to both of them. And I was so excited when I learned that she had gone to Wellesley. We're both Wellesley College graduates, and that she was interested in policy and politics, as was I. So when Bill was elected president in 1992 and was starting to go through lists of people to include in the new administration, Madeleine's name was prominent on a number of those lists. And Bill invited her to come to Arkansas. And although she was, someone who we had met, we knew about, we hadn't spent a lot of time with her. But I have to say it was truly friendship at first sight because her warmth, her intelligence, her sense of humor, she just immediately connected with us, and we felt exactly the same way. So when Bill asked her to be the ambassador to the United Nations, she and I had a lot of common interests in foreign policy and certainly spent many hours talking about the role that she then was fulfilling. She had me come to New York on several occasions to do events at the United Nations. She hosted a memorable dinner for me in the ambassador's apartment in New York. And we just became closer and closer in terms of our understanding one another, respecting one another. And it really culminated in an opportunity that Bill had to appoint a new Secretary of State. When his first appointment, Warren Christopher, retired, resigned, left the office. So Bill had to come up with a new Secretary of State. And it will not surprise you, particularly those of you at the Korbel School, that there was a lot of competition for that. A lot of people who thought they should be Secretary of State and who were running campaigns and putting their names out there and, giving tidbits to the press and the like. And I thought it should be Madeleine Albright. I thought she had done a really good job at the UN. I thought her values were really in line with Bill's. From the very beginning, in part because of her own background, she understood the danger posed by the war in the Balkans and the aggression that was taking place there, in terms of the impact on the entire region. She really had an astute understanding of the changes that were happening in what we used to back then call the post-Cold War world. And so I was a strong advocate of Madeleine's nomination to become Secretary of State. And luckily, my husband agreed. So she became our first woman Secretary of State.
That's fantastic. Well, as you heard briefly in the video, she was the first but not the last. Talk to us about how important she has been, how important she was for all the women who followed after, the doors she opened, her influence on the next generation.
Well, it's a really important question, and there are many strands to the answer, Fritz, because number one, she became a role model. She became someone who took a position that since the beginning of our country had never been held by a woman. That meant she was under a lot of extra scrutiny and people trying to, figure out how she would do and whether she was up to the job and, the kinds of things you hear people muse about when a woman first takes a position that hasn't been filled by a woman before. And she, more than met all expectations. Because of her presence, because of the way she conducted herself and presented her arguments. She was a really formidable debater. She had great one-liners. She could put people in their place. She would sometimes, say things that were, by some standards perhaps, impolite or impolitic, but they made the point. And so I think it wasn't just women, it was women and men, young women and men, who saw a Secretary of State who was down to earth, who communicated really effectively. And I think for a lot of young women interested in public service or certainly interested in international relations or diplomacy, it was such a reassuring sight to see her representing our country. So that was one aspect. But there was a second piece of this, which was very important to me personally, and that is once she became Secretary of State, she and I spent a lot of time talking about what we could do to elevate the roles of women in American foreign policy. And she was a great partner in that. We worked together to found a group with someone that is from Denver, Swanee Hunt, who was an ambassador at that time to Austria, to found a group called Vital Voices, which was originally aimed at literally giving voice to women who had been in countries in the former Soviet Union. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, an effort to, try to create democracies, try to get economies going. It was a, very challenging time, and there were a lot of women who wanted to play a role, but had no experience in, what does it mean to be a leader in a democracy or in a free society? How do you start a business? Whatever their interest was. So we started this group, Vital Voices. It was originally housed at the State Department. And it was an important statement about how we wanted to institutionalize looking at women's participation in society as a major part of foreign policy. Half the world, it's hard to imagine democracy succeeding without women having a role. So that was another big thing. Then finally, Madeleine headed the delegation to the Beijing conference in 1995. She was still at the United Nations then, but she was asked by Bill to head a delegation, which in those days was bipartisan, women and men, going to a United Nations conference about women. I mean, you can't even imagine that today. And so Madeleine was with me every step of the way when I was asked to speak there. There was a lot of controversy about whether I should go or shouldn't go. The Chinese, right before the conference, picked up a Chinese-American citizen who they threw in jail for human rights advocacy work. There were a lot of people in Congress, people in the State Department, people in the White House who didn't want me to go and certainly not speak there. And Madeleine was my advocate, my champion throughout all of that. And she was at one of her daughter's weddings right before we had to fly to Beijing. And Alice, who you'll hear from in a minute, will remember this. Literally, Madeleine had to leave the wedding reception to get on an airplane to meet me in Hawaii to fly to Guam to fly to Beijing. And she never missed a step. I think she might have even been still wearing her mother of the bride outfit when she got on the plane. But so in many ways, her breaking that glass ceiling was not just for her. It was really not just an inspiration and representation. She worked to institutionalize what it meant to include women's voices and women's participation in foreign policy, in diplomacy, in every walk of life. And that was an incredible contribution.
Let me follow up on. Of course, at that conference in Beijing, you gave what is quite a famous speech in which you said human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. Apparently a novel idea at the time. I'm curious, and obviously you and Madeleine were very much aligned in that regard. Just as you look at the world today, nearly 30 years later, where are we today in recognizing women's rights?
Well, we are backsliding, and there's enormous pushback. And to go back to the Beijing conference for just 1 minute, just as an additional note about that, yes, I gave the speech, and I meant to, as Madeleine and I talked about on the plane to Beijing, push the envelope as far as I could. And it should not have been a novel concept, but it was greeted as a novel concept because there were still a lot of doubts about whether women's rights were the same as human rights, if you can believe that. But the significant outcome of the conference was something called a platform for action. It was adopted by consensus by every country represented there, and there were about 189 countries and jurisdictions. It was negotiated hard. It included economic rights, social rights, reproductive rights, governmental rights. It included the full range of women's rights, and it included, a lot of ideas about how to move the debate forward. I'll give you another Madeleine example. So one of the things that it said was that domestic violence was a crime. Because until that was actually said and adopted, domestic violence was viewed as, quote, cultural. And it was Madeleine Albright who said, domestic violence is not cultural, it is criminal. And yet very few countries had any laws against domestic violence. That's just one example of many that I could give you about what we were attempting to do, which was to equalize treatment under the law, to equalize rights of inheritance, rights to property, rights to vote, rights to drive a car, rights to get an education, rights to have access to the full range of healthcare, and on it went. So this platform for action was adopted, and one of the things that Madeleine and I worked on for the rest of the Clinton administration was going around the world implementing it. And we had pieces of, efforts that were focused at helping to change laws in countries, helping to raise visibility about problems like trafficking, creating more of a global consensus about the need to improve the options and the opportunities, the treatment of women as we tried to move toward full participation and equality. So I think it's fair to say that it would be very difficult to get consensus today on that same document. And part of what's happened, it's very troubling, is that political leaders have arisen in many parts of the world who are explicitly calling for women's rights to be turned back. Now, we know in this country, obviously, the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case, but there are many examples where there's a cultural pressure that is combined with political leadership demands to
you know, have women be producing more children, for example. Have women be, you know, not given equal access to employment as a right. In Russia, in the last several years, after having passed laws against domestic violence, they began to pull them back. So you could literally go country by country, and in many, many places, you can see that. This pushback has, to some extent, I think, been both catalyzed by and certainly amplified by social media, which is a delivery system of misogyny around the world and aimed particularly at women of any position or visibility, not just in politics and other aspects of society or the economy, but any woman who is viewed as outspoken, as, you know, standing up for women's rights, taking a position that might otherwise have been viewed as a man's, all of that. And so the combination of a kind of turn the clock back attitude in many places about women's agency, women's autonomy, women's rights is aided and abetted by what we see online. And just a quick story is that I have been shocked in the last several years to talk to women in a number of countries, including our own, but elsewhere, who are in public life. They're in government, either as elected or official, mostly elected, not just appointed. And the amount of threats that they face. You know, I was in England recently where some of you might remember a young woman parliamentarian named Jo Cox, who was against Brexit, was literally killed at a speech against, you know, why she thought they should not leave the European Union. And somebody all, you know, agitated about Brexit and what it meant, killed her. So when I was in England last summer meeting with a group of women elected officials, all they wanted to talk about was personal security. I never used to hear that. But the threats that they receive online, and not just to them, but to their families, from both lone wolf kind of characters as well as organized efforts at pushback, you know, go away, get off the stage, quit speaking out. We don't want to hear from you anymore. I mean, it's kind of familiar sounding to me. So it's like, but it's applied not just to somebody like me who's, you know, got a pretty high profile, but just people who are in city councils, people who are on library boards who don't like the books that are being banned, you know, people who are just out there, women who are trying to do their work. It doesn't even have to be paid work. It can be volunteer work about what kinds of, you know, programs to have in the schools or at the libraries. Pushback. So yeah, it's a very, it's a very real phenomenon.
It's a very troubling phenomenon. Let me turn to another troubling phenomenon, another, you know, area in which we see backsliding, and another area in which you and Secretary Albright really aligned. She was, as you well know, fierce defender of democracy, who saw both its preciousness and its fragility. And in her penultimate book, I guess, Fascism, A Warning, she saw, perhaps sooner than others, the danger of rising authoritarianism. So a lot of ways we could go with this, but you know, a question is, why does it, you know, why does protecting democracy around the world matter? Why should it matter to us in the United States?
Well, how much time do you have?
We got a while.
If you have not read Madeleine's book, Fascism, A Warning, I really encourage you to do so, because she writes from the perspective of someone who, with her family, first fled Nazi invasions in Europe into Czechoslovakia, which was her home country, returning after the war only to flee from you know, Soviet communism. So she lived a life that had a first-hand understanding of what it meant to be up against forces and leaders who wanted to control every aspect of society and who would decide who was worth including and belonging and who wasn't. And her book is a very clear description, because you wonder yourself. I mean, I used to as a young woman, and I would be in history class or something. I'd see newsreel footage of Mussolini or Hitler, and I thought, who would listen to those people? They look ridiculous. I mean, I didn't speak Italian or German, but just up there flailing away and doing what they were doing. Why would anybody be influenced by that? Oh, well, And so what she saw was that the roots of this kind of authoritarian mentality, this strong man approach to governing, was sadly not eliminated with the end of World War II. But it was alive and well in many parts of the world, no matter what people describe themselves as. So you could, I think, fairly look at Putin and say, certainly authoritarian, probably fascist, certainly corrupt, certainly controlling, everything that we have seen very, very clearly in the last year. You could look at Viktor Orban, won an election, immediately began to stamp out a free press, stamp out a political opposition, get rid of intellectuals, get rid of the, Central European University that was based in Budapest, because who wants all those, professors and curious students around asking, difficult questions, and dubbing what he was doing as illiberal democracy. It's so Orwellian. Whatever that means, that's what he's trying to do. And even with Xi Jinping, and we think of that as being, a Chinese Communist Party state, but there used to be, in their own way, a form of politics and a form of leadership transition, an agreement that, okay, first we'll have you and you'll serve for 7 years, and then we'll decide who follows you, and you'll serve for 7 years, and then we'll go on to somebody else. And then she says, no, I'm not leaving. I'm taking control. I am going to be the leader for as long as I want to be the leader. And I'm actually going to humiliate the prior leader, Hu Jintao, in public to send a message that this is it. I'm here to stay. And whenever a leader decides to stay for life, that's a problem. So when we look at backsliding in democracy around the world, it's not like people in this country with those tendencies aren't paying attention. Why have they invited? Why has the Republican Party, the right wing, the groups that are part of their coalition invited Viktor Orban to come and address them? Because they like what he's doing. They like him suppressing the press. They like him subverting the judiciary. They like him making it difficult for opposition parties to compete. They even kind of like his picking of enemies, whether they're immigrants or George Soros, so they invite him and he comes and he gives them a full dose, and they kind of feel a sense of, kinship with these other countries. It's very important to recognize too that Putin has been subverting democracy for quite some time, not just the 2016 election, which, I'll mention but not go into. But they've subverted elections in other places in Europe. They have suborned politicians. They have funded parties. I don't know if you remember the picture of Marine Le Pen, the main opponent in France, going off to meet with Putin in Moscow, and we now know coming back with a lot of cash for her party. And it's one of the reasons I think in the end Macron beat her this last time, because he had a great line in a debate when he said, well, yeah, what does your banker Putin think? I mean, because Putin has been currying favor, intimidating people, using oligarchs' money to buy media, doing a lot to continue his campaign against democracy and against the West. So in our own country, a number of people were paying attention, including, of course, the former president, who I no longer really like to refer to as the former president or even a presidential nominee. I like to refer to him as the cult leader, because what he did, like a smart demagogue does is to pick up on all these strains of prejudice and bias and insecurity and fear and hate, and weave them together into a message like, you know what, you and I, we really understand each other. I hate all the people you hate. And you know what? I'm going to get even for you. We're going to figure this out because, you know, otherwise there's carnage in the streets. I mean, how bizarre was that campaign and how bizarre was that inauguration? But that was straight out of the fascist playbook. And now he's even more enraged because he lost. And he couldn't believe he lost because he wasn't supposed to lose because all of his allies were supposed to make sure he won the Electoral College, even if he lost the popular vote by a greater margin than he lost to me. And so this is the kind of, you know, this is the kind of mentality that leads to authoritarianism and leads to certainly fascistic tendencies, right? There's a debate, I'm sure you all debate this here at the Korbel School, you know, is it really fascism? Is it just good old authoritarianism? Is it leaching into totalitarianism? I don't know. I'm just watching it happen. And I'm watching people form coalitions between financial interests, partisan political interests, religious interests, ideological interests, all together, literally trying to push the clock back on how we live together and whether we understand we're stronger because we are a diverse country. And we shouldn't be in a zero-sum game. We should be figuring out how to lift everybody up. Everybody. I don't care who you are, where you are, what you do, everybody. And, you know, that is not the prevailing political view, unfortunately, now of, you know, one of our major parties and leaders of it.
We could pursue that further, probably. I'd probably be remiss if I didn't ask you about, you were talking about Russia and Putin, about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As you know, Madeleine's last op-ed published on the eve of war in the New York Times, entitled "Putin is Making an Historic Mistake," remarkably prescient. Predicted much of what happened. She saw that in that article, and I think, again, you shared this view that this war, this aggression was not just about what's happening, you know, in Ukraine, tragic as that is, but that it was a challenge to democracy and to the rule of law in the international arena. Is that how you see it as well?
Absolutely. You know, look, Madeleine and I really shared a similar view of Putin's ambitions. I had no argument with people who hope for the best from Putin. And there were areas that I negotiated with him on when I was Secretary of State that were important to us, a New START treaty, for example, on the numbers of nuclear weapons and how we monitored each other's stockpiles. The Iran sanctions, which I negotiated, that we ended up being able to get through the Security Council. There were things that we did have an interest in trying to reach agreement with. But I never doubted for a minute that he wanted to not just consolidate rule over Russia, but begin through either intimidation or co-option to reconstruct his near abroad, his neighborhood, to be much more in line with and obedient to Russia's interests and Russia's views. I didn't know whether that was just mostly because of who he was and the fact that as a former KGB agent, he saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, as he said, as one of the greatest catastrophes in world history, or whether it was kind of the tendency of Russian leaders to, you know, feel like, my gosh, they have this huge landmass, let's do more with it. I never really, I have lots of stories about him, we don't have time for that in my encounters with him, but I never doubted that his goal was to do everything he could to expand Russian influence and literally control. So when he invaded Georgia in 2008, the end of the Bush administration. You know, people did not want to see that for what it was. I mean, there was a lot of talk like, well, you know, Saakashvili, who was then the president, is kind of a difficult guy. And, you know, he kind of walked into the trap. It happened. Oh, you know, we don't know what to do. I mean, we sanctioned, we rhetorically, you know, said he shouldn't have done it, all that. But he seized 2 sections of a sovereign country on his border. Okay. Then I was in Ukraine in 2013. I had left Secretary of State. I was going to speak there. And Ukraine was on a path to requesting EU membership. Not NATO, because that was still highly controversial, but EU. And the young people of Ukraine, after, you know, pouring into the streets, after, you know, expressing themselves, that it wasn't that they wanted to turn their backs on Russia. They also wanted to be able to move toward Europe. I mean, they were so strategically located, and they wanted the benefits of both East and West together. So when I actually was in Crimea in 2013 at a conference, and there was so much enthusiasm. And then I started talking to some of the people who were there, and they were sympathetic to this idea of moving toward the EU. But they were telling me that, you know, Putin is making it very clear that bad things will happen if we move toward the EU. And we don't know what to do. And of course, you know, I was no longer in office, but I was deeply concerned about that. And lo and behold, you know, the next year he invades, seizes Crimea, seizes, you know, the Donetsk, and basically begins the war then. The thing that the press doesn't cover and we don't remember is that more than 10,000 people died between 2014, probably more than that, but that's the number I've seen that can be verified, between 2014 and last year's invasion. This was an active hot war, including, you know, shooting down civilian airlines that clearly traces back to Russian equipment and Russian allies. Again, people were like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And you know, Ukraine became a political issue because, I mean, you can't make this up. Paul Manafort, the guy who ran Trump's campaign, was working for an oligarch in Ukraine to basically, you know, overturn the Ukrainian government to install a Russian, you know, proxy after the Russian president had been thrown out of Ukraine. I mean, you can't make it up. So Manafort's working for Deripaska, who's basically working for Putin. And then, you know, Trump, whether he's told by an American, he's told by a Russian, whoever tells him, decides that Ukraine is a great way to leverage against Democrats and against, you know, Putin eventually. And we get into the first impeachment and on it goes. So here's what I think Putin thought. We know from reports coming out of the Trump White House, mostly from John Bolton, that Trump intended to pull the United States out of NATO if he got reelected. So if you're Putin and you're thinking, you know, I'm going to take Ukraine. Ukraine is strategic. Ukraine has not just huge agricultural assets, industrial assets. It has rare earth minerals. It has mineral assets that we need for the new economy. I'm taking it. But let's just wait. If Trump wins, he's going to do it for me because he'll pull the U.S. out of NATO, and I'm fine. So then, you know, news alert, Trump loses. And so Putin goes, okay, what am I going to do now? I still want Ukraine. I need Ukraine. If I'm going to reconstruct, you know, my version of the Russian Empire. And you know what? I think Biden is really wounded. I think post-Trump, America's playing a weak hand. Europe is never going to stand up to me. The U.S. is divided. They're not going to do much about it. And oh my God, look what they just did in Afghanistan. So, hey, let's get ready. And I think that was, you know, pretty much the calculation. And because he is in a dictatorial, you know, role, he only heard what he wanted to hear from anybody who reported to him, whether they were military or intelligence or security reports, that it would be an easy task. You'd invade from both Belarus and from the east, and bang, you would have Ukraine. So that to me is kind of the very short version of what he was thinking. And I think we've learned a lot. And I think Madeleine was right. I think this has been a terrible mistake for Putin and Russia. The issue is whether we have the staying power to really make it stick. Because what have we learned? We've learned, number one, that, hey, guess what? The Biden administration did a heck of a good job uniting Europe against Russia. And it was really difficult, but it wasn't just in terms of military equipment. It was in terms of sanctions. I mean, we had the United States basically saying to our European allies, you know, this is hard, but you have to join us in these sanctions, which means Germany and Eastern Europe, you're not going to get your energy from Russia anymore. We have to make them bite. And they did it. And they did it in a way that people did not think when it started was possible. So the military equipment, the sanctions, and it's not just Europe, South Korea, Japan, Australia, others have been helping. So Putin woke up and the world pretty much was united against him. That was the one thing, big mistake. The second thing, which I think is really important, I think we learned Putin's military was a fraud. We learned that Putin's military was not at all equal to the task. They were poorly trained, they were poorly equipped, and they were really poorly led. And what they have done is to take massive casualties without any regard for human life, throwing body after body against, you know, targets like Bakhmut. And so the threat, the fear of this massive Russian military was diminished. That was a mistake for Putin. Third big mistake, I think, is remember he went to China before he invaded, and she was like, oh, we're going to do anything we can to help you, because she was also being told by Putin, it's a cakewalk. I'll be in Kyiv in a week. We will get rid of the existing government. We'll install a government that is favorable to us. No worries. Well, she watches, you know, this happen, this unfold. It doesn't go like that at all. And I was one of those who believed that she was probably looking at moving against Taiwan, whether it was cyber, blockade, invasion, whatever the choice was going to be, moving against Taiwan because he was explicit that he was going to solve the Taiwan problem. And all of a sudden he goes, oh my gosh, wait a minute. I got to take a deep breath here. I got to see how this plays out. So I actually think that Putin's problems in Ukraine have influenced Xi with respect to timing and approach to Taiwan, which is also good for us. And the final thing is there is a lot of backbiting and internal conflict going on within the military, between the military and what's called Wagner's army, run by this guy Prigozhin, who emptied the prisons to basically send these convicts to their death. I mean, this may be an exaggeration. It sounds like one to me. But I have read credible sources which say that Russia has lost 100,000 men in Ukraine, more, and probably more than that. So I think, Madeleine was a very clear-eyed observer of Putin. She didn't meet him all that often because he didn't really come into power until she had left. But I met him a lot, and she and I would talk about him because she had a very ongoing interest in Russia thinking and Russia actions, and she spoke Russian and she studied Russian, so she was an expert in it. So I think Fritz, that Madeleine saw that if we didn't blink, if we stayed the course, if our European friends would also, stand with Ukraine, that the dominoes would not fall, to use that old metaphor. Because there's no doubt, if you talk to a Latvian, an Estonian, a Lithuanian, a Pole, a Moldovan, a Finn, if you talk to any of those people who are on the borders and have had experience with Russia in the past, there is no doubt they saw Ukraine as the opening gambit, not the end, but the opening. So let's hope we stay the course. Let's hope that the counteroffensive, whenever, wherever, however it unfolds, pushes the Russians back. People ask me all the time, how's it going to end? I don't know, because you know what? It's not our business as to how it's going to end. It's the Ukrainians' business. If they push Russia out of the territory that they seized since last February, is that a point at which they stop? I don't think so. I think the Ukrainians are now committed to pushing them out of Crimea and pushing them out of all of Ukraine. So we have a ways to go on this, and it's really, really important. Ukrainians win, Russians lose.
Now, we are pretty much at time, and I get myself in big trouble if we get, although I'd love to pursue that and other questions with you. Such a marvelous opportunity to talk with you. It is a fascinating sort of somehow that in this moment, Madeleine's background, her history has come alive again, right? That family story, that history is so relevant to this moment again, and somehow seems very fitting that we end talking on that question.
I think that's a really important endpoint. If you've never lost freedom, if you've never had to flee before soldiers wearing the uniform of a foreign country invade your homeland, if you've never watched the subversion of your democracy and the takeover of your country by a foreign power, as Madeleine saw all of that, lived all of that, it might be a little difficult to really imagine what's at stake. And I think that's what Americans today need to really understand. And Madeleine is a great guide to that, because a lot of what's happening in our country right now, the rollback of voting rights, the attack on institutions, including literally an attack on our Capitol, people who think violence is the answer to disagreements that should be debated and discussed and voted on instead. We don't have that lived experience that Madeleine Albright had. So we have to imagine what it would mean to start losing our freedoms one by one, and to have leaders who felt unaccountable to any institution or the rule of law. And we sadly right now in America have some leaders who think the better way to govern is by dictate, tell people what they have to do, hold them, to account if they don't do what you tell them to do. And it's a really important moment in American history to try to incorporate the lessons of the past and learn from them. We can have our disagreements. My gosh, that's the American way. We can disagree about all of the issues and how we're supposed to think about them and how we're supposed to address them. But when you have leaders who ban books, who are trying to tell you what you can say, who tell major corporations that I don't like what you're doing, so I'm going to try to destroy you, that is from the past. We've seen this play before in other places. We are not immune from it. And the saddest thing to me right now is what's happened to the Republican Party. I was in the Senate for 8 years. I worked with practically every Republican senator on something. I crossed the aisle. I found principal compromise. We hammered out legislation. So I know a lot of the people who are still there. And I know they know better than to allow this to go on. And they are twisting themselves in rhetorical pretzels instead of standing up and saying, no, he did not win. There were 60 lawsuits. He had no evidence. And guess what? We still believe in facts and evidence. Now, we're sorry he didn't win, but he didn't win. Let's get on with it. And the number of people willing to say that is too few. Or, you know, after the immediate fear and outrage with being invaded by our own people at our Capitol and fleeing for your life from the House and the Senate, we've seen the videos. And people in the immediate aftermath saying how horrible it was and how we have to, you know, figure out how to prevent something like this from happening again. Now, oh, they were tourists. I mean, you can't make this up. And it is Orwellian. It is twisting language to fit a political agenda that is not connected to truth and fact. And you can have all the disagreements in the world. And I'm in the middle of a lot of them because I believe certain things. Other people of good faith believe something else. Let's figure out if there's common ground or not. But what's happening, unfortunately, in too many places right now is not that kind of politics, but an authoritarian mindset. You either believe what I believe or you don't count. You either do what I want you to do or you're not included. And that's what we have to learn from Madeleine. She warned us, and those warnings should lead every one of us, regardless of, you know, what political party we are part of, to do everything we can to make sure we elect leaders who respect democracy and who are willing to let people vote and count every vote and live by the consequences of that. That's what I think Madeleine would want us to do.
And thank you so much for sharing those thoughts and all the thoughts this evening. Certainly this quality of discourse that we see now is a central issue for us at the Korbel School at the University of Denver. We're doing what we can to promote civil discourse, conversations across the aisle, fact-based, evidence-based policy. So we're all, I think, in this together on that front. Let me obviously thank you again for this evening, and thank you for whether one agrees with everything the Secretary believes, as you say, we can disagree. But an extraordinary life of public service. I mean, I believe you first kind of emerged in public consciousness from your graduation speech at Wellesley College a couple of years ago. And over that time, you served in the Watergate commissions. And we know the rest of the biography, years in Arkansas, obviously, and years in the White House, your time as a senator, your time as Secretary of State, and of course in the political campaigns, and as being a public figure for an extraordinary time. So please join me in thanking Secretary Clinton for tonight, but for a life of remarkable public service. We are, yeah, we'll just sit for a minute, yeah. Unless you want to stand, yeah. Now we have one more important thing to do this evening, and that's the presentation of the Joseph Korbel Award. And Secretary Clinton, I'm delighted if you would join me in presenting this award this evening. Let me just say a word about the award. The Korbel Award we've given for many years now to quite an array of really impressive people. It's given to outstanding individuals who embody the values of the Joseph Korbel School of International Studies and have committed their lives to creating a more secure, equitable, just, democratic, and sustainable world. It is impossible to think of an awardee who more exemplifies the values of Joseph Korbel and of the school named for him than Secretary Madeleine Korbel Albright herself. That tiny giant of American foreign policy, pioneer and mentor for succeeding generations of women in international affairs, embodiment of the promise of America, inspiration for democracy's defenders around the world. So on behalf of the Joseph Korbel School, it will be our honor to present the Joseph Korbel Award this evening to Madeleine Albright in memoriam. And accepting, on Secretary Albright's behalf and representing her Aunt Kathy, her Uncle John, her sisters Ann and Katie, and the entire Korbel Albright family, is Alice Albright. Alice, please join us.
My goodness. Secretary Clinton, Secretary Rice, virtually, Dean Mayer, guests, friends, people I've just met tonight, thank you so much. I am just so honored to be here on behalf of my family. It's indeed incredibly humbling to be accepting an award from my mom, and in doing so, paying tribute to my grandfather. Secretary Clinton, we are so honored that you were able to be here tonight. Secretary Rice, virtually, thank you so much for your wonderful, generous words. And thank all of you for reaffirming throughout the evening our family's lasting bond with the University of Denver. As Fritz has said, this has been a time of heavy loss for our family, with the passing of my mom last year, and also my Uncle John's death just a few weeks ago. I'm so glad that John's family, John's wife Pam, sons Joe and Peter, my cousins, my new cousin-in-law, Christina, could be here. We are all so grateful to Dean Mayer for dedicating this evening to John and for traveling to Washington last weekend to speak at John's celebration of his life. This school indeed was one of my Uncle John's great passions, as it was for my mom, and it is for my Aunt Kathy. Sorry she couldn't be here tonight, but is very much with us in spirit. We all feel a deep friendship with DU, because our family would not be what it is without DU. With the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, DU extended my grandfather a lifeline by offering him a professorship in 1949. He began his tenure here just months after he was granted political asylum in the United States. My grandparents, my mom, and her siblings, in fact, did not know a whole lot about Denver when they resettled here after fleeing the communist coup in Czechoslovakia. But this wonderful community embraced them, and they in turn embraced this community. My grandmother used to tell people that there were two great cities in the world, Prague and Denver. And my grandfather, who we called Bumpa, used to repeat the famous slogan at the Denver Post, 'Tis a privilege to live in Colorado. My mom only lived here full-time for 6 years, beginning at age 12. But those were consequential years for her. And for the rest of her life, she always considered herself to be a Colorado girl. I vividly recall my own visits to Denver each summer as a child with my sisters Ann and Katie. We played in the parks near this campus, in fact, Observatory Park, went swimming in the pool, and visited the home of Bumpa's boss and mentor, Dr. Ben Charrington and his wife Edith. We were always told by my grandmother and my grandfather to be on our best behavior, put on clean dresses, and of course we always tried. But what I remember most was spending precious time with Bumpa and Grandma, listening to their stories, and eating plenty of Czech dumplings, and eating lots of Grandma's cookies. Although Grandma and Bumpa clung to their favorite Czech foods, they loved their adopted country beyond measure. My grandma used to call us every 4th of July to make sure we were singing patriotic songs, or as she said in her Czech accent, patriotic songs. And Bumpa often reminded us, kids, never forget it is also a privilege to live in the United States. My mom inherited her parents' love and gratitude for America, and she felt deeply motivated to give back to the country that had given her family the chance to live in freedom. The way in which she chose to serve was shaped by her most important teachers, Bumpa and Grandma, who instilled in her clear convictions and the values that she carried to her final days. My mom was often asked about the influence that her parents held on her worldview. She would answer this by stating 3 core principles, which I'll summarize quickly here. First, she said that her parents taught her that human freedom is both immeasurably precious and inherently fragile. Second, they taught her that because of its history, its identity, and its power, the United States has a responsibility to help others promote and preserve democracy worldwide. She would say that her father was a true American exceptionalist, not because he felt we could ignore the rules applied to others, but because he, my pages are getting stuck, but because he feared that without American leadership, we would live on a globe with no rules at all. Finally, my mom would say that her parents were optimists. Given all that they had witnessed, they were grimly realistic about the shortcomings of human behavior. But they also had a faith in the capacity of people and nations to change. They hated the stereotypes that condemn whole regions to cycles of suspicion and strife. They believed that respect for the dignity of the individual was the lifeblood of democracy and the litmus test of any philosophy or political system. These principles trace their roots back to my family's experiences in World War II and the tumultuous years that followed, but they were absorbed, learned, and ultimately taught here in Denver. The reason why my mom became such a fighter for democracy was because of Bumpa and Grandma. And our family is so proud that the Korbel School teaches these lessons and more to new generations of students who are drawn to its incredible legacy and are in turn building an even more remarkable future for this wonderful school. So thank you once again on behalf of my family for not only giving my mom this wonderful honor, but for inspiring new generations to learn and to make a difference in the world through initiatives such as what goes on at DU and what was announced tonight, the Wellesley Korbel Albright Fellowship. We are truly grateful. Thank you so much, and good night. Thank you.
Well, it's been an extraordinary evening. So before we close, just a few words of thanks. First, let me thank our staff, Jill Haro, Kristen Gelstein, Katie Aker, and the entire team at Korbel who managed this event. Thank you so much for your work. Thanks to the Anna and John J. C. Foundation for their financial support that helped make tonight possible. And thank you all for being with us this evening. And thanks for all you do for the Korbel School and the University of Denver. And congratulations to our awardees, and especially to all of you students who are graduating in a couple of weeks. Congratulations. Came up on you fast, didn't it? Anyway, thank you all. It's been a wonderful evening. Good evening to you all. Thank you.